Well, Sam, thank you so much for being willing to do this interview. I've been following you for years, and it's been awesome to watch your journey and your leadership and your influence just really grow and develop. And now you're adding value to thousands and thousands and thousands of people every week. So just so excited to get to spend some time with you and learn from you. But for those who may not know you at all, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, man. I try to describe it in two categories, kind of media and ministry. Media and ministry. And maybe it's flip-flop, ministry and media kind of first. Spent a lot of time traveling around the country, speaking at different churches. And let me say it this way. I spent a lot of time before COVID-19 traveling and speaking. And now it's starting to pick back up because, the virus in certain areas is starting to die down. People are trying to, really getting used to kind of social distancing and all types of things. So it's exciting to kind of get back on the road and back in these churches and in these organizations. And so that's awesome. And then on the media side, I've got a podcast similar to yours and television kind of broadcast where we interview some of the largest Christian leaders that is kind of in our world, people like Andy Stanley, Pastor Michael Todd, Lecrae, so on and so forth, just about their stories. And it's kind of the preamble for, I know this book we're going to talk about today, A Greater Story. It's the same name as the podcast. And we try to have people on the show that are living in what we call a greater story. And we try to take them from little Lecrae up to where, he is now. And so that's kind of a little bit about me and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and that's exactly where I want to start off. So you have a brand new book out called A Greater Story. And I had actually just listened to one of your interviews with Carrie Newhoff, and you have an unbelievable story. And I want to dive into that a little bit. But why did you write this book? And then can you just kind of share your story with us? Because I just think it's remarkable.
Yeah, man. We started sharing my story at different churches and businesses, nonprofits around the country. And the reaction to the story was so electric and emotional and, some would say spiritual that I said, man, we gotta put this in a book because, when you have a book of this size, 200 pages, you want to ask yourself, do I have enough to write about? Right. I mean, is there, because you're writing and you're writing and you're writing and you're writing and you're hoping that you have enough to put in there. And you want to ask the question, is this something that people actually will want to read? Because I always say every great idea is not a God idea. And so we wanted to spend some time as a team figuring out, is this a God idea? And I think for me, a couple of things make it a God idea, right? But the biggest of them all is, are people being impacted? Is their life being shaped in a greater way with the Spirit of God and with these biblical principles like never before? And we started seeing that on the road, and we said, okay, we got to write this book. A little bit about my story, and this is really kind of the main premise of the book. It's about half story, half teaching. Which is really important because I've read biographies before, and unless you're really into the person, you're kind of like, all right, but how does this apply to me? Yes. And so we wanted to spend half the book telling the story, but then the other half of the book really saying, here's how this stuff applies to you. Here's how we write it. So instead of it being a biography, we wanted it to be a lesson about how to discover purpose and how to maximize life and how God can take a mess and turn it into a miracle. And we've leveraged my story to do that. And so here's the story. So age 21, and I'll be at Amplify soon in Pittsburgh. And we're telling that we got a book tour that we're launching next week. Nobody knows about it. Exclusive.
That's it.
So we're excited about it. Met my biological family for the first time after 25 years. On the Steve Harvey Show. And this was a wild situation of how we got there. The beginning of that was age 21. My mother was 21 when she had me and my twin sister. She had 3 kids already. So that's 5 kids age 21. Extreme poverty. Dad left the picture. Actually, Paul's right here. And I'll say about 3 months ago, we lost him from COVID-19 up in the hotbed of New York City. I've never met him before, spoke to him twice in my life on the phone. This was after we kind of reunited with our biological family. But he had diabetes, and he left the hospital in New York when COVID was everywhere, went down the street to get drugs, came back to the hospital, and passed away from contracting the virus. But I tell you that to go back to age 21 when my mother was 21, and to let you know how long substance abuse was a part of his life. And so he was on drugs, and he left the picture. So here my mother is in the hospital having to make a decision. Do I raise them in poverty, or do I give them up for adoption in hopes that everything would kind of work out? And so she does give us up. Don't get too sad. We get adopted by a couple who met in Washington, D.C. a year prior. My mother, my adopted mom, who from now on, when I say mother, I'm talking about her. When I say father, I'm talking about the ones that adopted her, that raises my parents, if you will, met in this laundromat on a Sunday afternoon at 3 p.m. And the night before, my mother had been hit in the head with a hammer by her husband at the time. He was extremely abusive. So she got up the next morning going, by any means necessary, I got to get out of this situation. And she had a gun in her purse and was walking around the laundromat because she needed an alibi. She was like, by any means necessary, I'm getting out of this. I'm rolling out. And meets my dad. And they end up walking out of the laundromat. He was in the middle of his second divorce. He goes through with his divorce. She goes through or figures out how to get a divorce. And then they start dating, give their life to Christ, get married, realize my mother can't have kids. And so they come down to Augusta, Georgia to adopt. Wow. They walk over to our crib. Me and my twin sister, we had just been given up for adoption. And they said, we want them. The lady who's running the adoption home says, you don't want them. Where they come from, they're probably not going to be much. Cocaine, drugs, all the, so on and so forth. Poverty. My parents said, no, we think they're going to be okay. The Lord has spoken to us, given us a word. We think they're going to be all right. They take us home in spite of what was said about us. And Channel 2 Action News, which is a news station here in Atlanta, Georgia, came out to the house, found out about the story. We got there about 3 days before Christmas, and the headlines were at Christmas miracle, twins have been rescued. Long story short, my sister gets all A's from kindergarten up to 12th grade, becomes an industrial engineer, Spelman, Georgia Tech grad, and I'm here with Doug.
Nice.
And all, and all the things that that God's been able to do. Fast forward to after that, I really do think even in that moment, realizing God took us from a mess and did a miracle. And if that wasn't enough, around age 24, my adoptive dad kind of is doing the tradition, family tradition, NFL football. That's what we did. Sunday afternoon, that's what it was. And there was one rule: nobody talks during the game. So he breaks the rule and starts talking during the game. And he says, hey, you need to go find your biological family. We're like, what? What are you talking? He said, well, you could grow up one day and marry your cousin. You'd never know it. And I said, what? You've lost your... He said, and God told me that Steve Harvey was going to help you do it. And I said, okay, you've lost your body. I grew up on Auburn Avenue. My dad had a barbershop on Auburn. He would watch TV every day, in between cutting hair. And he would watch Steve Harvey Show. He said while he was watching it one day, God told him Steve Harvey was going to help him. And so I got up and left because I thought he's lost his mind. He convinces my sister 2 weeks later to write into the show. And I'm like, why did you do that? Because she didn't even really want to. She said, well, he kept yelling and, they're not going to write us back. A year goes by. My phone rings. It's my sister. I say, hello. She said, the Steve Harvey Show just called me. They're going to call you. Bye. Hangs up the phone. My phone rings in another 2 minutes. Hello. Hey, this is Dorothy from the Steve Harvey Show. This is my first week on the job. 100 stories on my desk. Yours was the top story. We think we can help you find your parents. Do you want to do it? I said, well, let me call you back. Call my sister. Do you want to do it? She says, no, but I feel like we have to do it. This doesn't just happen. They bring us up, me, my parents, my sister. They say we didn't find anybody. We're so sorry. We go to commercial break. We come back after commercial break. Steve says, hey, I know I said this. That's not the case. Your biological mother is here. Eleanor, come on out. Our mother walks out. And we reunite with her and our 3 siblings on national television. And so that's what the book is about. Wow. And that's really, honestly, that's like the first, not I don't even say chapter, but kind of the intro. And then from there, we walk, we break into my life, and okay, we know that this happened, but how did it happen, and how did God move, and what obstacles did you have to overcome, and how do you now view life, and we jump into this greater story. Because I think the greater story that God has for us all doesn't just happen. We have a part to play. So,
Hmm. Thank you for being willing to share that story. I do want to just ask some follow-up questions. I am just curious, for your mom and dad, you know, they got led to Christ. I'm just curious, how did they get led to Christ after they met? Do you know?
um, you know, I don't know. I think my mother knew about church and had been on and off. And I believe the catalyst for them, that I often say, you know, their life was pretty hard up until then.
Hmm.
And so I think, when even though you know the way home, you may not always go home,
Hmm.
right? It's like, I know that there's safety here. I know that it's like a college student who knows their parents love them, but they don't want. It's like, no, I'm gonna make it on my own. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna try it. And then one day you go, all right, I gotta call mom, right? I gotta pick up the phone. And so I think for them it was that. It was, we know the way home. We just hadn't gone there. And I think they had done it their way long enough in terms of their words. And so they said, you know what, let's try it God's way.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And I know in doing my research for the interview, you speaking to the subject of influence is important to you, and you've learned a lot about influence. And when I heard you share your story, you just asked this question. You said, "What is influence all about?" This was in another interview. And can you just talk about that? I know you talked about the influence of your parents, and they didn't have to adopt, but they did. Can you just talk? I just want to hear you tell leaders about influence and what they should be thinking about influence in their lives.
Wow. Influence. Yeah, I think we are all the sum total of our influences. Um, I think I think we would all like to believe that we chose where we are and that we created our reality. And to some extent, we did. But honestly, I think the reality that we find ourselves in today is more a product of our influences than we think, right? I think for the first 15 years of our life, um, or maybe even 16, maybe even first 18 years, right, till we become an adult, we don't know what influence is. I mean, some of us do, depending on what our parents do, but the vast majority of people living in America and just in life, we're not privy to really understand. Okay, this is what influence is, and It wasn't until I was, in my 20s, that I really started to go, okay, what? Wait. Explain to me this concept of influence, and not only explain to me this concept of influence, but how has influence been actually uh, uh, determining who I am and helping me make my decision. And so for I had a book before, A Greater Story, which is a smaller book. I don't talk much about it. It was for a boutique audience. It's called Find Your Voice. But within it, it talks about, I actually open up the book talking about influence and the idea that whether we like it or not, we are always being influenced by something. That's the power of influence. That whether we are intentional about directing that influence or not, it still is in our life and it is still taking us somewhere. So we ought to get serious about what influences us and start directing the influence, because something's always going to be influencing us, whether we got intentional about it or not. And so I think we have to be intentional, even especially as leaders, with deciding what we're going to put around us consistently, and what we're going to listen to, what we're going to read, what we're going to hear, who our friends are going to be, who we're going to date, who we're going to marry. All of those types of things, influence us.
Yeah, it's so good. I'm just curious, what are some lessons you've learned maybe about stewarding your influence? I mean, clearly God's continued to grow your influence more and more of a voice. How do you steward that as a leader? And again, you're a young leader with a lot of influence. I'm just curious how you view your
Wow.
day-to-day influence.
Yeah, I believe it was Andy Stanley that said, influence is hard to gain and easy to lose.
Hmm.
Influence is hard to gain and easy to lose. And I think for me, that has proven true. It doesn't mean that I don't step out there on issues that I need to speak out on. It doesn't mean that I hide, but I do think it means thinking twice before I lean into something, before I say something, before I, move on something. Because influence is such a fragile thing. And it's so easy to lose. And so I think that's one of the biggest things as it pertains to stewardship that I have found, is that when you build it, you have to build it carefully. Also, you have to figure out what kind of influence you want, because there are all types of influences. You can have influence in the business sector, influence in the Christian sector, influence, right, in the mainstream arena, influence outside of it. And all of those are different types of influences, And so with that being said, you got to figure out what kind you want, because I've seen a lot of people, if they're not intentional about building the type of influence that they want, or even identifying what they want, then they'll stumble into influence and then they become a prisoner of their own influence. It's like, wait, I didn't want to be known for this. Like, now I got to do this. I got to do, like, in other words, there are people that want influence. There are people that desire influence, but just find themselves lost in it. And even on the Christian side, I know people that have gained a lot in the Christian sector, and then when the rules of that influence kick in, they're like, whoa. Like, it's just like, wait, you mean I can't, like, I should watch how I drink in public? It's like, yeah, but isn't, I thought drinking wasn't a sin. It's like, no, it's not a sin. But wait, so then why do I have to? It's like, well, because there are people that, and it's like, what? It's like, I don't want to be a Christian influencer. Because every influence comes with rules. Then there are people on the business side that's like, man, I want to share more of my faith, right? I want to be more here. I want to do more of this. I want to do more of this. And they say, well, how come I can't be as open as, it's like, well, I know for me, when I speak in the corporate environment, the limitations are different.
Yeah.
When I'm in the corporate environment, it's okay for me to express what I believe in, but I also have to be inclusive of what other people believe in that are in that mainstream space. Doesn't mean I have to denounce what I believe, but it does mean that I have to be careful about how I communicate things, because this is not a Christian audience or a Christian platform, and they have a responsibility to be, in a sense, kind of amoral, if you will. And so in the corporate space, I have to be really cognizant of, hey, depending on what you believe or where you land, this may mean something different to you. However, love is boom, 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 boom. I'm not quoting necessarily scripture in the business sector, even though that as a Christian, I believe certain things. But what I try to do is I try to find the threads that we all can connect on and agree on. But again, those are limitations. And so I think that's why I go back to, you got to be intentional about figuring out what kind of influence you want to have. And then after you figure out what kind, you want to understand the weight that comes with it.
So good. Thank you for sharing that. I do want to transition away from the book. And again, for those of you listening, we'll post links to the book in the show notes. Make sure that you get a copy, buy a copy for your team, share this with anyone that you know that you think it would encourage. It's going to be awesome. And so thanks again for writing it, Sam. I want to take a few minutes and just talk about racial reconciliation, and just say, one, thank you for using your voice and your influence to address the subject. I've watched everything you did at North Point, and I've listened to several interviews, and you've been so helpful to me. And so I just wanted to spend a few minutes and just leave this really broad with the time we have left. But, racial reconciliation is obviously at the forefront of issues going on in our nation. And when it comes to leaders, what would you encourage leaders to do when it comes to racial reconciliation in our world, and how can we make a difference?
Wow. racial reconciliation. We're living in one of the greatest opportunities in our lifetime.
Hmm.
At least in the last 40 years to solve racial tensions. Um, and it is because we are starting to pay more attention. It is because we are starting to have the conversations that we've never had. But you know, something that I said on a show a couple of days ago that I think is important is that I think where we've been going wrong in this conversation, even as of late, is I think we're putting the cart before the horse. And let me explain what I mean by that. I think that the only way forward, and Martin Luther King Jr. often talked about this, is conversation. It's the only way forward. We protest and resist for the sake of having dialogue.
Hmm.
That's why you protest. And if anyone protests for different reasons, then they're not. I would venture to say they're not doing it right. The goal of protest is to gain attention so that you can create change. But change only happens through conversation. You got to sit down and go, well, okay, we're going to create change, but what change are we doing? And so I would venture to say, you know, we have a conversation problem in America right now and around our world. We have a conversation problem. And because we have a conversation problem, we have a misunderstanding problem. And because we have a misunderstanding problem, we have an issue actually solving the racial issues that we have because we're not talking. And so so what I tell leaders now, my biggest thing is helping people have better conversations. Helping people have better conversations. Here's a couple of questions I ask, and I won't give them all. I'm creating a resource on it right now to try to get out to the country of, hey, here's a resource for racial reconciliation, to have better conversations and racial reconciliation. One of the questions are, you know, do people feel like they can be 100% themselves around you without being penalized? It's a big question. We're not saying that anyone accept anything. What we're saying is, are you properly postured to have the conversation?
Wow.
The other thing is, you know, how do you react when somebody says something that you vehemently disagree with, as in politics, race, religion? So again, we're setting the stage, the context for the conversation, because and there's so many other questions I could give you, but if we just start with those two, if you have not worked out those two questions, then when you sit down to have the conversation, you're doomed from the beginning.
Wow.
That's where we lose each other, because somebody says something we don't agree with, something that we don't understand, something and we just, and we just start freaking out. We start freaking out because we don't know how to respond. And when we do that, people don't feel safe. And next thing you know, we're fighting. We exit the conversation. We stop listening to each other. When we stop listening, we stop understanding. And if we can't understand, we can't actually solve. So then it leads to the protest, and it leads to the direct action. It leads to the violence, and all, because we can't, you know, we can't hear each other. You know, Martin Luther King often said that a riot is the language of the unheard. He wasn't condoning riots. In fact, he said that I don't condone riots. But what he was saying is that when a riot is produced out of the context of the language of the unheard. So we got to start hearing each other. We got to start posturing ourselves to believe that maybe there's something we all can learn. I mean, we got to be ready to have these combos, man. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I think that's absolutely huge. And I guess, yeah, I think that's awesome. Is there anything else that you asked this question in one of the talks you gave that I just loved? And maybe the answer is just having a conversation and listening. But you said at the end of the day, we all just need to ask ourselves, like, what does love require of me? Can you just expound more on that question? I think that was so profound, simple, but very profound and very hard to execute on. Can you talk about that?
What does love require of me? Yeah, you know, again, an Andy Stanley ism, if you will. What does love require of me? I think when I think about that, that is, it's very similar to the story of the Good Samaritan. And um, when Jesus is talking to some of the teachers of the age, and they're asking him, how do I how do I inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, well, I mean, you got to do the great commandment, love your God, love your neighbor as yourself. And they say, well, who's my neighbor? Who's my neighbor? And he starts walking them down that question, and they jump into the story of the Good Samaritan. And obviously we know the story. A priest walks by, Levite walks by, and then the Samaritan reaches across and takes care of the Jew that has been beaten, and so on and so forth. Jesus looks back at them and says, who was a neighbor to the man in the story? He said, well, obviously the Samaritan. So we get the title, The Good Samaritan. Well, he's bringing that up because at the time, Samaritan and Jews didn't play together at all. So it's really a story about racism and a lot of other isms. But it is specifically a story for sure about racism. He put down what his culture would say you need to do, what the history has been, what the tension has been. And he reached across lines, and he did what love required of him. He became a neighbor to them. And so I think for us in that conversation, I think we've got to always ask that: what does love require of me? And a lot of times it requires sacrifice. So,
thank you for that. With the time that we have left, I want to take you through what we call the lightning round. Bunch of fun questions that I love asking leaders, and we'll just dive right into it. And the first question is: what is the best advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
Best advice I've ever received was from a mentor of mine, Capriccio Scatz. He's a UN ambassador. And he said to me, there's a difference between effort and results. And that was really big for me, because that's when for me, I was like, if I just work hard, then I'll become successful. He said, that's not all it is. Working hard is very important. But if you have not created a strategy, if you have not created a win, then you could be running around in circles and never take one step forward.
If you could put a quote on a billboard for everyone to read, what would it say?
Ooh. That you were created for a reason and a purpose, and don't give up until you get it done.
What's the best purchase you've made in the last year for $100 or less?
$100 or less. The best purchase, $100. Can I say Jordans?
Yeah. Awesome.
I love the Jordans.
Love it. Other than your own, which we'll continue to promote, but what books have you read that have made the greatest impact on you?
Well, I'm getting my master's right now in biblical leadership, so I'm reading the Bible every day. So it's getting real. I think so. The Bible is one. The book of Ezekiel I would throw out there, which is a whole nother. We can get into that later. That's on the biblical side. I think just on kind of a regular book side, in a sense, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, John Maxwell, is one of the best books in the world for anyone trying to lead anything. He writes in such a tangible way, and that book is old, but it's basic leadership principles. There's something about the way that he writes that you can read and apply immediately. Read and apply. So that's an amazing book.
I'm with you, man. He's my hero of heroes. So big John fan. You have your own podcast, but I'm curious, what are your one or two go-to podcasts that you listen to frequently?
Definitely Andy Stanley Leadership Podcast for all things leadership. Carey Nieuwhof for all things leadership. Carey Nieuwhof just had John Tyson on. You got to hear that. Oh my gosh. Woo! An incredible episode. I literally listened to that episode 2 days ago. And I mean, I couldn't stop listening. So please, if you're a leader, after you turn off L3, right, go and listen to the Carey Nieuwhof and John Tyson interview. Love those podcasts. I hate to say it, and Gary Vaynerchuk is just an amazing voice in the space. Now, he's not a Christian, so if anyone's out there going, Sam, wait a minute, I know. Listen, I think you can learn something from everybody, right? Yeah. And so that's Gary Vee, but excellent marketing mind.
Yeah.
I love listening to what he's doing.
Love it. And I wasn't planning on asking this, but you've had the honor and privilege to work at North Point and work for Andy Stanley, who's one of, the greatest leaders of our generation. I'm just curious, are there one or two lessons that come to mind that you've learned after sitting under Andy's leadership?
Definitely. Oh my God. One or two. It's like a million.
Yeah.
One, I will change your statement to I've been able to work with Andy because me and Andy are very close. And so he takes that staff thing really serious.
Love it.
And so if you work for him, he's like, oh, you work for, but we work with, so we just,
I love that.
We've worked with one another for a really long time. In terms of speaking capacity, consulting capacity, all types of things. North Point launched us. It's our home. It would take me a long time to explain the relationship. But anyway, what I've learned from Andy for sure, here's the biggest one that I've been thinking through lately. We have an ongoing text thread with one another about race issues and political issues and all these other things, which hopefully nobody ever gets. But one of the things that he said, and that I never forget, we were talking about a leader. He said, I said, what lesson do we learn from this leader? He said, what you don't kill in your 20s will destroy you in your 40s.
Wow.
Yeah, what you don't kill in your 20s will destroy you in your 40s. And he was talking about doing your deep emotional soul work. Your deep emotional soul work. What you don't kill in your 20s will destroy you in your 40s. And he said, so Sam, and it's the same thing as 30s and 50s and 40s and 60s and 50s and 70s. It's the same principle, but he's do your work, do your deep emotional work. And I think we all know what that means. The father wounds, the mother wounds, the childhood disappointments, the low self-esteem, the fear of certain things, the imposter syndrome. This is deep emotional stuff that we all have, and we kind of sweep it under the rug. And what he's saying is that if you don't start getting rid of that thing now, then what will happen is in 20 years, it'll grow and it'll get to the point to where you can't control it anymore and it will destroy you. And we've seen many leaders do that just because they have not done their deep work. So do your deep work. I'm doing my deep work right now as much as I can. You want to kill it before it kills you. So anyway, I could go for 3 days on that.
Oh, man. Yeah, I want to have one other interview just on that. That's amazing. Greatest leadership pet peeve?
Done by other people or by myself?
Well, done by other people. Let's do both. I would love What's up?
Greatest leadership pet peeve. Ownership. I think when leaders think they own their people, it's a problem. That's my greatest pet peeve because it leads to all types of things. When you see people as things that you own rather than things you steward, people, there's a whole different. You start getting the loyalty and this. Well, you should have did this and you owe this. And it's like no, like we're all here for a limited amount of time, and I've been blessed with the opportunity to be able to steward you while you're in my space. And while you're in the space that God has allowed for us to create. I don't own you. You don't owe me anything. We're helping each other. That's another Andy lesson for sure. Hey, we helped each other. You served us, we served you. We don't own you. There's no loyalty. Like, hey, it's all good. Like, and so, but that's when you see people as, things to be and opportunities to be stewarded as opposed to things, owned. And so that's my biggest pet peeve. I think for me, I think what people may, Sam got to have an assistant. I got to have an assistant.
Yeah.
If Sam doesn't have an assistant, it's a bad day. I was texting somebody the other day. We were booking something. I was booking some different things, and they were saying, hey, so do I need to reach out, or how should I I said, you got to hit my assistant. I said, because if not, I'll be on a beach somewhere running around looking crazy. And you're like, where are you? Are you on the Zoom? Are you on the Zoom? And I'm like, the Zoom? What do you mean? What are we doing today? And so that's something that's really important for me.
What's one bucket list experience that you've had that you think everyone should experience in their lifetime?
One bucket list. Everybody should meet Will Smith.
What's
I
that
met
like?
Will Smith. Woo! I never knew what a star was until I met him. And I've met some famous people.
Wow.
Wow. He's like, he walked in, the whole room changed. It was like, what is he doing? Like, I don't know what he's on, but it was everybody should meet a really famous celebrity at least once in their life. A really like super famous, like you know what I'm saying? Like the Queen of England. Like just something like somebody huge. Justin Bieber. I mean, I don't know how you feel about Justin Bieber, but Will Smith, whoever your person, Taylor Swift, whoever your person is, you should meet them.
Who's on your bucket list to meet still?
Obama. Woo!
Nice. That's good. Nice. Hey, it'll happen. Let's go.
If I met Obama, wow. Obama. All right, don't get me started.
No, I love it. Man, I'll pray for you that'll happen. That'll be great.
Yeah. What about y'all?
Oh man, to be honest with you, my bucket list was John Maxwell, and I had the opportunity to have lunch with him in January. So I think number two, and these aren't like super rock stars, but man, I would love to have lunch with Dave Ramsey. He would be like number two on my list. So
yeah.
But John was incredible. So yeah, I don't know if that's boring, but
no, Jobby, 70 million books sold worldwide. Maxwell, come on, I know about him.
Well, hey, we have to wrap up our time together, so I'll just leave this really open-ended. Anything you want to leave leaders with today? This has been a great conversation.
Yes, I'll say when your story connects to God's story, it leads to a greater story. New book out right now. If you're in a season where you need hope and you're trying to discover how God can turn your mess into a miracle, because he can, the book is for you. So, and just honored to be here, man. Keep listening to L3. It's going down.
Oh, hey, thanks, Sam. And hey, for everyone listening, our goal from this podcast episode, we want to sell 1,000 of Sam's books. So let me know if you bought one, 1,000. If someone wants to buy all 1,000, let's go. Let's go. And thanks again, Sam. And people can watch the clip of you on the Steve Harvey Show, correct?
Yes.
If they want to see that. I know you shared about that, but if Sam's story impacted you, which I can't imagine it not, you can actually watch that unfold if you just Google that. So.
And if you're in the Pittsburgh area, I'm at Amplified. I'm going to talk about it on the 11th in October. So
October 11th?
October 11th. Yep.
Well, let's make sure we promote that and get that out there, and we'll get some L3 there. And will we get a signed copy of your book? What's up?
Oh yeah, book tour, whole 9. It's going down.
Well, Sam, thank you for stewarding your influence so well. Thank you for adding value to us today and everyone that will listen to this. And hopefully we'll get to do it again sometime.
Yes, sir.
See you on the 11th, baby.
Ha ha!